All right, thank you everybody for coming. Actually, we're going to do today a little bit different than we've done it before. The reason being is each one of these town halls that we've done, this is our 16th one. I don't remember how many it is. If do you know or anybody know? We're at 15 or 16, I don't remember. We've done a lot of these since September of 2019, and now we're going into 2020. They're going to go all the way until April of 2021. And the reason we do this one a little different is the audience always changes. In some of these town halls, we have 70 community members that are really impacted by gangs. Sometimes we have 8, 9 that are community members that are a little impacted, but depending on the audience, we always switch it up to get the most impact out of it. And you'll see what I'm saying as we go along. But for the community members in the room, I'll just ask you here, what brought you here today? So you're 100% right and accurate. And we're going to get to something bigger as to how do you actually do that? What do we do and how do we do it? So the first thing we have to do, sorry, that thing's a pain in the butt. That thing just fell out? Oh, this thing fell out? Here we go. It'll load back up, give it a second. Regardless, the first thing we have to do, especially when you're looking at tasking this issue, right? And they say to you, thanks man. They say to you, get a gang member out of a gang. 3 things as an organization you got to look at, all right? They're going to give you this mission. And those 3 things are, what exactly is a gang? Or what is a gang? We need to know what we're looking at. 2, where do we go? And then 3, who is a gang member, right? So don't worry about this. We don't really need this. I can do it. It's fine. Yeah, leave it. It's fine. So the number one is what is a gang? I'll ask you here, what is a gang? We have to have a definition of what we're going to work with. And here's a problem with definitions. The problem with definitions are there is no single definition of a gang. The reason why there is no single definition of a gang paints a bigger picture. The bigger picture is gangs impact everybody differently, right? So for us as law enforcement, we look at gangs very differently than a school looks at gangs, or probation and parole looks at gangs, or social workers look at gangs, or community members look at gangs, or parents look at gang members. It's very differently, so we couldn't take a worldwide definition of a gang member and say that's what we're going to go after, or gang, because it's not true. But in our lens, and not just our lens, but academically across the world, gangs do 3 things. So where focus became very clear. Gangs deal drugs, they control a territory, and they collect debt. Those are the big 3. Right, so gang has to do that. So when we see a group of people, if they're not doing that, they don't really fit the classification of a gang. That's not to say that's all that gangs do, but those 3 must exist in all 3 because they absolutely exist. What are other crimes gang members do? What are the things that they do? Deal drugs, right? And what else? Guns. What? Break and enters. Human trafficking. Sex trafficking. They do a host of things. All of those things can be connected to one, if not all 3 of those core issues. Deal drugs, collect debt, control territory. All 3 of those can be collected to that. So gang members do many things, but we have to bring this down to a special focus to say, what is a gang member? In this community right now, if we come in the summertime, is there a park across the street? Probably, right? There's a park around here. There might be a basketball court or something. Do you see kids hanging out there all the time in the summertime? Are we going to call them gang members? No, we're not going to do that. We got to look at specifically what are we looking at. If we start calling clusters of kids gang members, the problem is going to be way bigger than what it actually is. We're actually going to lose focus of what we're supposed to do. So we know what gangs actually do. The second part is where do we go? So in the city of Toronto, where do we go if we're going to find a gang member? Give me an intersection, anybody. Clubs or bars. Okay, we'll do this scenario. I'll do this in everyone because it always works well. Imagine I go into my pocket, I pull out a pill. All right, and for the police officers, participate too, man. Let me hear what you got to say. We did this with other coppers, so don't worry. We all screwed up. We got a pill in our pocket. And this pill, we're going to give it to a gang member. We have 1 hour right now, starting from right now, whatever time it is, to find this gang member in an hour. We're going to give them this pill. We're going to change their life. They're going to come back to where they grew up. They're going to start a business. They're going to create economies. They're going to have thousands of jobs. They're going to have a stature. This kid is going to make it. And everybody in that community is going to say, man, this kid made it. He came back here, reinvested back in this community. My kids have jobs. My kids look up to this kid. There's no longer gangs here. We got to give this kid this pill. So we have to do 2 things. We have to know where to go in the next hour, and we need to describe what this kid looks like. So number 1, where do we go? Magic pill, magic solution. Give me an intersection. And now describe the gang member to me. Let's start with, is it a boy or a girl? Boy, perfect. Okay, and rough age category? 24, 25? Everybody's good with that? No? Younger, older? What do you guys think? Younger?
15, 25.
Oh, let's go 15, 25. Good gap, right? We can kind of deal with that. Clothing, what do they dress like?
Baggy clothes.
Baggy clothes? Hoodie? We got chains or a hat? Yeah, both? Both. They have running shoes or dress shoes, or what kind of shoes are they wearing? Jordans. Brand. Do they have, how many, yeah, LeBron. How many cell phones do they have? More than one. 3. Do they have headphones in? Yeah, and it's a Bluetooth. They got something in their ear, right? And are they listening to music? No? Talking to their friends. If they're not talking to their friends, if there is music on their phone, what type of music is it? Hip hop. Remember, guys, we got to find this kid. We got an hour. Now we're down to 30 minutes. We're going to change this kid's life. So we got to be here, man. We got to be here. We got to be focused on who we're going after and how we're going to do this. And we got to be open and honest. All right. Now describe their hair to me. What type of hairstyle? You got a beautiful shaved head like this? Modeling it up, or they got a nice full head of hair? What type of hairstyle?
Maybe cornrows.
Maybe cornrows. Perfect. What else? What about facial hair? Any facial hair on these guys? Nothing like that? Okay, now here, what skin color? This is my favorite part. This is I love this, all right? I love this part. What skin color? Listen, here's the problem. This is the problem. We've done 16 of these. I've done this scenario at least 16 times. And in every one of these scenarios, we've had a magic solution in my pocket. And the second I get to the point of skin color, everybody shuts down. So you're more concerned about saying something offensive, potentially, than actually solving the problem?
And it's color brown.
Brown. Okay, we good at that? Brown? So, hey, good news. This is the first time we've heard brown instead of black. First time. And I'm not talking about us going into communities that are not black dominant. Out of the 16 town halls we've gone to, there has been a large representation from both the black and the brown community. But in every single one of these scenarios I give, not only in these town halls, but in universities, in colleges, to businesses, to other government stakeholders, when we do this and we're about to find a solution, the description is a young black kid. We describe them, instead of brown, for Markham and Eglinton, we said black. So today, now I can say, okay, one group said brown, but a majority of them black. Now here's some other issues with that, all right? Is that to say that that's not true? It's Toronto. It could be any, but we're not talking about what it could be. We have a solution. So we have to get out of the idea of what are we going to do that's right here. And this is the issue we have, and I'm not saying you, I'm saying us, everybody. Is the issue is we're in this weird culture right now where you can't just say what your experience has told you out of the fear of offending somebody. So you're so afraid to say what you know based on your experience, and even though experiences can lie, that you're willing to sacrifice a solution. That's a problem for all of us. So when we talk about organizational change, culture change, this nonsense of being afraid to offend people based off of your experience has got to go in the garbage. Because unless we're going to start calling it what it is, where we're at, and in this community it might be brown kids, in other communities it might be black kids, and some it might be Asian kids, it might be European. It doesn't matter. That does not matter. That's so far behind who gives a garbage about it that we got to get back to what it actually is. And for each community, it's completely different, but we got to know what we're looking at. Right, so with that, we found is, well, when we had done this first, Jay and I, and we were talking to some experienced police officers in the Gun and Gang Task Force and our drug squad and some other places where we deal predominantly with gang members, we did this exercise and we said, guys, we need to know who we're looking at. And everybody had the same description, but we realized, okay, organizationally, you can't go off of subjective experiences, you got to go objectively. So what we did find was this. These gang risk factors, they were published from Public Safety Canada 2007. What they said is, the more of these risk factors you check off from the age of 0 to 18 plus, the more likely you are to become a gang member. And that same categories or the same risk factors there, you have them on the laminated card. All right, and look at that there, and does anything there mention race, gender, sex, or culture, ethnicity, background, religious upbringing? None of that is there. And this is academically proven. These are PhDs who've spent their life in the field to determine what are the commonalities among gang members all over the world. all these nonsensical things that we've attached to it, we've attached that. We made that up. But those come from real experiences. So we got to be cognizant of real experiences plus the academics. But for us, we got to get out of the experiences, because the problem we're having, the problem we're seeing is there's so much focus and attention on, in some parts of the city of Toronto, on black kids, that I'm not talking about them being over-policed, over-serviced. What I'm talking about is there's other communities that have the same issues that are being neglected. Right? That's also a problem. If you go to Brampton, what are the majority of the gang members there? East Indian, right? South Asian. You go to Vancouver, South Asian, and or different parts of China and Chinese triad, as well as different Asian organized crime groups that's over there. It's different everywhere. But the point is, we got to look at what we're actually dealing with. And if in some communities it's black dominant, we got to deal with that issue. In other communities, if it's Asian dominant, we got to deal with that. The only time race, background, culture, ethnicity, and sex come into play is when we're dealing with how to solve the problem. That have nothing to do with the problem from the get-go, but it does matter when it comes into solving the problem. Because I'll ask you, Afghani background, can I apply potentially the same prevention or intervention services to you that I could potentially apply to a Christian or Catholic or Sikh or... No, it doesn't work. Because there's different religious beliefs, there's different upbringings, there's different customs, and there's different rituals. So the only time we got to take into account culture and ethnicity and background is when we determine how are we going to help solve this problem. It has nothing to do with the problem in itself. It comes into solutions. So we have these risk factors, and what we end up doing is we just take a look at these and say, hey, the more of these you can check off, the more likely you are to become a gang member, if not a criminal, which is the exact same thing. Now take a look. There's anything there surprising to anybody? If I show this to a kid in grade 8, they're going to be able to look at this and say, yeah, the person who has all these most likely is not going to be the healthiest person growing up. The second part to that is, where do we go and how do we end up in your community? So that became another issue for us. And what we found was, we'd gone and talked to not only police officers, but probation and parole. We were up with you guys, City of Toronto, and some other people. We'd said, hey man, where do we actually go to find gang members and their families? So we knew how to find them. We know how to find kids that are going to most likely be this or adults. The second part became, how do we know where to go? And same thing, we all had different intersections, right? So give me some more intersections in the City of Toronto. Man, what's up, man? Give me some more intersections in the City of Toronto where there be gangs. You have all these pockets, right? And everybody knows them as gang areas. So when I go into high schools in these areas and I ask them, I'll do this exercise with kids in high schools, I'll say, where are you from? They don't give me their address. They give me their hood. Right? So I ask a kid in the west end of the city, hey, where are you from? He says, and then I have to clarify with them and say, no, if I were to write a letter, what address do I put on there? Then they're like, oh, where do I live? So there's a whole portion of the population that identifies with the gang culture, right? And there's some other issues with that. But for us, how we ended up here and why we're doing 31 town halls and why we picked that number, wasn't a magical number we picked out. The City of Toronto, a couple years ago, sorry, I'm just not feeling well. A couple years ago, split up the entire city into 140 neighborhoods. Are you guys familiar with that? Yeah. So where that came from and how you guys got deemed your neighborhood, which is Eglinton East, we are today, is the city got broken down based on equitable scores. And the equitable scores were based off of multiple things, but they wanted to look at things like, what does the household look like in terms of the number of parents at home, the average median income, the number of kids, how many of the parents are immigrants or new to Canada, how many of them had established jobs, what were their access to economic opportunities, what was their access to subway lines. And out of the 140 neighborhoods in the City of Toronto, they designated 31 of them as low equitable neighborhoods. So there's 31 neighborhoods that were in the bottom of the unacceptable level. I don't know what an acceptable level is, but 31 under the bottom. And when we had done a cross analysis of where all the gangs that we know are, where's the gang activity happening, where are the shootings, the homicides, the drug trafficking, the debt collection, the abductions, the sex trafficking. If I were to take those 31 low equity neighborhoods and take those gang areas, it's the exact same, which is not an accident. One of the risk factors here is social disorganization, which means that your community and your environment can sometimes have more of an impact than the individual when it comes down to decision-making processes. So we said, perfect, we know what a gang is. Deal drugs, collect debt, control territory. We know what makes a gang member, amazing. And then the third part became, we know where to go. So we know where to focus the next couple of years. Let's focus on these areas. The good news is for the low equity neighborhoods like yours here, millions of dollars are being pumped in to bring you guys back up to normal. That being said, when we come down to the solution to all this stuff, we'd found a gold model in the United States that said if you really want to have a solution for this, what you need to do is you need to think outside of your individual lens and your individual perspective and start looking at the global picture. Who else is impacted by gangs and how does it happen? Now these risk factors, they don't all happen at the same time, right? They happen at different times. I'll give you the different times. The family risk category, so if you look at it, there's 8 risk factors there. The family category in itself happens from the ages of 0 to 6. That's the biggest indicator of them. And the biggest indicator of 0 to 6 is, and for those of us, who has kids in the room? Yeah, kids. Anybody who had a 3-year-old at some point, right? Or know a 3-year-old? So I want you to think of a 3-year-old that you know. Might be yours, you don't have to admit it. Could be somebody else that you know. That's an absolute nightmare. Like terrible kid. That's an indicator something's not right. I'm not talking the kid who doesn't put the iPad away or pees on the toilet seat. I'm talking the one who kicks the walls and steals stuff and pulls people's hair and always goes in your bedroom when you say, don't go into my bathroom. That's the guy and girl we're looking at. So at the age of 3, the family risk factor category, that's the biggest standout, all right? As they get older and they get to the age of 6 and they get to the school risk factors, now we have the family category. At the age of 6, you're adding in the school risk factors, and the biggest indicator is at the age of 6, school failure. So, anybody have a spouse or some family member involved in school or academics or education? Any coppers ever go to deal with a 6-year-old in school? I remember when I first started, we'd get a call once in a blue moon to an elementary school about a kid out of control, a 6-year-old, and for whatever reason, somebody thought I should call the guys with the guns. And we'd have to show up, right? And we showing up to an elementary school, 2 police officers in a car with a vest and a gun, and there's the principal or vice principal, and they got the 6-year-old, and they're like, we don't know what to do, can you scare the kid? Yeah, it's a legitimate thing. Listen, how many parents have said, for the police officer in the room, and I speak to myself, I have friends that when they have smaller kids are like, don't make me call Uncle Ron. And then when I show up, they're terrified, to play with me. And then I gotta beat them up because now they built this big picture of me, so I gotta beat kids up all the time. Which I gotta live up to my reputation. So far I'm undefeated, so that's a good thing. But that's an indicator. So now we got family risk factors. At age 6, you got school. All right, kid's failing school, he's not doing well. And then we get to 9, and at 9 is when they develop their peer group. And the biggest risk factor there is we call it child delinquency. Child delinquency is a great term to use, but I'll ask you this, for any of us who have 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds, or even remember back when you were 9 or 10, think about when you're 9 or 10, or even if you hear it now, and you come home from school, and your kid who's 9 says, Mommy or Daddy, Jimmy at school pushed me and took my lunch money and said if I say anything to anybody, they're going to beat me up and do other things to me. What do we call that? Bullies, right? You know what that's called if you're over the age of 12? It's called robbery and extortion and threatening. So at the age of 9, when they develop their peer group and they start making their friends, and how they develop their peer group is, it's City of Toronto. Unfortunately for us, in these 31 low equitable neighborhoods, there's a big density of community housing. All right, now for those of us in community housing, or those of us who've ever lived there, or who've ever been there, or policed there, or any interaction with community housing, is it uncommon to see a 8-year-old playing by themselves? Like in the lobby?
No, that's normal.
That's normal, right? So this kid who's a pain in the butt at the age 3, failing school grade 6, gets to age 9, mom or dad probably said to this kid, you got too much energy, get out of here, go dump it outside. Kid goes outside, now that kid is gonna find more kids like him or less kids like him. This kid's just found like 5 other kids that parents have said the same thing, that have all been a pain in the ass since the age of 3, failing school at 6, been isolated from everybody else. At 9, finally they're out and they find other kids like them. And now they're committing delinquency, which is just crimes. They're practicing crime. And then it just gets left over. We just say it's bully. Sometimes we'll say it's boys being boys. Kids will do these type of things. We create all these expectations or excuses, and we tolerate this behavior as it goes through. And then at the age of 15, now this is the key thing, between 9 and 15. At 15, the biggest indicator is they'll tell you they're a gang member. They're not hiding it. Or for any of the police officers who've ever dealt with a 14 or 15-year-old, have they self-identified as a gang member to you? I've had it on multiple occasions. Who do you rep? Who do you roll with? You look at their social media. They're blasting it. You're in probation and parole. Do they hide it? Oh, this is a badge of honor, man. As much as I have Toronto police on here, they have the same thing. They're not hiding it. There's no secret here. You got to be blind not to see them. They're blasting it out to you. They're telling everybody, this is who I am. So then at the age of 15, now they're a full-fledged criminal, full-fledged gang member, if not moving up on the ranks. And one of the people we've dealt with in the past, his story's a long one. I won't go into the details with it, but between 9 and 15, it's very indicative. And for the police officers in the room, this is a very impactful story to look at. So we deal with this gang member, and how we end up getting in touch with this gang member is Jason and myself for 6 months had gone out to every division, and we spoke to over 2,000 frontline police officers. We gave them a 15-minute crash course on the risk factors. We said, hey guys and girls, if in the course of your duties you're out there, you come across a kid that fits this profile, that has all these risk factors, and you got a relationship with them, and you can somewhat plant the seed in there saying, hey, if you want to get out of this lifestyle, if you don't want to do this, we can connect you with some guys that might potentially be able to help you out. Let us know. So we did that, and within the first week, a police officer found a kid, was 15 years old and arrested, contacted us, said, I got a relationship. This kid's expressed some interest and wanted to get out. So we go and we talk to the kid and we deal with the family. And here's the story with this kid. And these are the small things where we're missing big things. And the stuff that we're missing is incredible. This kid at the age of 8, he's that kid. 3 years old, pain in the ass. 9 years old, pain in the ass. 6 years old, pain in the ass. And now mom says, what? Get out of the house. This kid moves out of the house. He goes, plays with his friends. And now he's excited, right? And I want you to picture you're that parent of this kid. All right, and in this particular case, this parent was 25 by the time she had 5 kids. This is the middle kid. And people have said in the past, well, she shouldn't have had 5 kids. Guess what? It's already here. Too bad. You got to deal with it from now forward. So this kid's been neglected from the get-go, understands that when I do bad things, I get what I need, which is attention. And then they move forward. I'll ask you this here. Anybody who's a parent, what happens to a newborn if you don't hold it? It dies. They actually die if they're not held. So there's an innate need to feel connected. The other part to that is from the age of 0 to 7, we operate at what's called a theta wave. And I want you to think for yourself, and just think for yourself right now. When you go to bed at night, or you're driving home, and you have had done something in that day that you absolutely regret, we all got moments where we go home, we're not proud of ourselves. And we might not tell anybody, but we know what we did. And when you're driving home, and I want you to think about, you're thinking in your head and you're thinking to myself, and I want you to think back to when you're 0 to 7. We all operate at what's called a theta wave. And a theta wave is a state of hypnosis. And that state of hypnosis, what we're doing is we're collecting data subconsciously, and that collection of data is not what we need to do to survive, not what we need to succeed in life, it's what do I need to become to survive. So now that same kid who's 1 of 5, he's just collecting this data, and he's not coming from a fantastic place. And this has been an uphill battle from the get-go. And at the age of 6, same mechanisms at school, right? Isolated. That same kid who's at 6, who's nonsense at school, gets isolated from everybody else. Then finally at the age of 9, this kid manages to get dumped out. And then he goes, finds other kids just like him. They all operate, they all think the same way. And I want you to think here, anybody who's had dealings with gang members, are they not all kind of weirdly the same? Is there something about them that you're like, oh, this guy's in the game? That's that innate, that subconscious, that firing and wiring, that blueprint in the brain, that framework that says this is how I need to operate. And they operate in that function very well. They actually achieve a lot for the environment that they came from. So now this kid in particular, he's 8 years old. His mom manages to get him a bike. He has this bike. He goes out with his homeboys. They go to a corner store. He comes back out. His bike is stolen. He comes back home, tells mom. What does mom tell him? Think back to yourself. Let's say for us here, if I could tell you this, if that was my parents and they'd hustled like that to get me that bicycle, and I went out at 8 and it got stolen, and I came back home and I said it was stolen, whose fault is it? That's my fault. My dad would have punched me out before I even got out the stolen part of the sentence, right? I would have been knocked out. He would have said, dummy, you know how much I had to do to get this for you? So this is exactly what happens to this kid. Well, mom feels bad for him, just like all of us, right? She feels terrible. So she gets him another bicycle within the next year. Now he's 9 years old, he goes out, bicycle gets stolen again. Comes back home, tells mom. Now here's the crazy part. Both times reported to police. Both times we go. Now for us, there's no bicycle prevention task force. City of Toronto, you're never gonna get your bike back unless we come across it by accident. I'll just be straight up with you. You're not gonna get it back. So families already got 2 experiences with police. Something of high value to them is low priority to us. Both times we go, we do our job, but they already have 2 experiences with police where they say, the police can't even find the stolen bike. So all this other stuff I see in my neighborhood, shootings, murders, thefts, drug dealing, they can't even find a bike. What are they going to do with this? Well, now this kid, 11, 12, and 13, gets reported missing 3 times. Each time he gets reported missing, the first time we find him, the second time we find him, he's with the same group of people. The third time we don't find him for a week. He comes home on his own. Mom calls, we come back in. Now at the age of 13, he's had 5 experiences with police. We've done our job effectively well in all of them. I read all the reports in this case. The cops did a great job. But 5 times their experiences have been somewhat skewed and negative. And then by the age of 15, by the time we get him, he was brought in custody for drug trafficking at the age of 15. He had a whole bunch of releases that he was on. So he was on bail and he got breached a whole bunch of times. And we go in there, we talk to him. And he's 15 and he tells us everything. So he paints that story back for us a little bit in conjunction with our police records. But it gets a little bit deeper than that. And when we talk to him, we say, hey man, how did you end up in a gang? Not only does he tell us how he ends up in a gang, but he actually lifts up his shirt and he's got the gang logo on his shirt, right? He's very proud of it. He doesn't hide it. This is who he is. So he tells us at the age of 12, when he's out with that group of friends, going around in the neighborhood and they're doing nonsensical things, hanging out at the park, riding the bicycle. He said an OG in the neighborhood came and pretty much recruited him. They started him off small. They said, we want you to just steal iPhones. Don't do robberies, just steal iPhones from people. When they stole iPhones, they were given McDonald's. And they said, we want to escalate it to robberies. We want you to find girls in your neighborhood and rob them for their iPhones. Then they escalated to robberies. And the crimes escalated from there and there and there. And he was recruited in by an OG, being an original gangster, old-time gangster in his neighborhood. He was 12 when he got recruited in. How old was the OG? 18, 30? Anybody else? Scott, what's up, man? The OG was 16. Okay, so now we're in a cycle of kids recruiting kids. So he was 12 when he got recruited in. He got recruited in as a 16-year-old. We got him 3 years later. He's been a gang member for 3 years. Full-fledged gang member for 3 years. Admits it, tells us everything that happens on the inside. We identify who the recruiter was. The recruiter was now 19. And when we identified him, he's a suspect in a murder. We've got big problems here. Now, unfortunately, with this kid, we lost him. All right, I don't mean he's dead. What I'm saying is he wants nothing to do with us. He doesn't respond to any outreach strategies, which we're okay. We try every time he gets arrested and every time he shuts the door on us. It's the best that we can do. But here's the real issue, and this is where we're kind of going with the end of this. This guy is going to be 18, hopefully. Okay, knock on wood. Hopefully he makes it there. Reality is, probably not going to make it there. The way he's going, he's probably not even going to make the 18. He's going to be a homicide number at some point, whether it's this year or next year. It's inevitable the way he's going. But then this is the stage where we get at now, where you got the community risk factors. So 3, you got family. 6, you got school. 9, you got peer group. 15, you got individual. And then 18 up, it's community. And how does it manifest itself? What do you see in the newspaper every day? Right now. Murder, shootings, homicides, stabbings. We just had a federal election. Federal election. All of the party leaders were talking about what at one point? Gun violence. That's when it's a community issue, because 3, 6, 9, 15, at some levels all this garbage was tolerated. And it got to the point when it was 18, when now there's serious community violence happening, and everybody puts their hand up and says, what? Somebody's got to do something about it. And who's that somebody? The police. The guys with the guns and girls with the guns. And listen, we take that very seriously, and we love to do it. We love to come in and catch these people. That's what we all signed up for, is to catch bad people doing bad things. So we want to come and get them. But our mission was never to, in this particular unit, in this particular initiative, was never to double down on the enforcement efforts. Is we got to take a deeper look and how do we penetrate this at the root cause? How do we stop this from happening from the first place? Let me ask you this here. 3-year-old, we know how they stand out. There's no secret here. We know what the background they're coming from. We know what neighborhoods they're going to be in. We know what characteristics they display. Look at the family risk factor categories. 2 things. If we can get into that household between age 0 to 7, when these kids are already operating in a really easily influenced state of mind, how easy is it to deal with it? There's 8 risk factors in the family category? 8 things with a kid 0 to 7. You're just coaching a kid. Is it easy to deal with that? No. But is it difficult? No. Is that something you want a police officer for? No. I don't have, for the police officers in the room, anybody have a background in psychology, child psychology, youth work, social work, family psychology, family development,
Are you talking like PhD or like?
anything. Have you done an online course? Have you watched a YouTube video? Nothing. That's not for us. You don't call 911 for a 3-year-old kid. A 6-year-old in school, most police officers I know, we have no academic background when it comes down to education, learning difficulties, educational frustration. You don't call 911 for that, right? You go up to a peer group. The delinquency, potentially you call 911. But that's the beginning of where we come into play. But are we the best to solve that problem? No, that's not our problem. I don't mean to say that's not our problem. What I'm saying is, we're not the solution for that. We're the beginning of it, but we're not the solution. 15, peer group. Gang members in class. Police officers, what are we supposed to do there? Is that something you call 911 for? Is that something where you say the police got to fix this problem, gang members in class? What am I going to do?
I think you guys like, how the officers come into school.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great place to be, but are we the answer to this? Preteen exposure to stress. Sending the guys with the guns. This guy's already stressed out. He's got all these issues. You know what we're going to do? Throw in the cops. Doesn't work that way. Go down to the community risk factor. High crime neighborhood. Police. Presence of gangs. Police. Access to drugs. Police. Gang behavior. Police. Feeling unsafe. Police. That's 100% where we are. That's where the police lie. That's where we're the kings and queens. That's where we dominate. That's where we're supposed to come into play. But if we're asking to have a solution for this, we got to go to the family. So let's talk about the family environment. Who are the impacted people there, or groups or stakeholders or agencies? Who's the most impacted there? It's the family, right? Moms, dads, siblings. If you were to ask outside services to come in just to deal with those 8 risk factors, who would you think would be appropriate to come into that place? Children's Aid, potentially, right? Children's Aid, they might be able to provide some resources, some support systems to really build and foster that family up. We get the school risk factor. Obvious one is who's impacted there? Who's impacted the most in the schools? Schools themselves. Teachers, principals, other students, guidance counselors, programs. They're impacted there. Who else is better when it comes down to educational frustration? If your kid, I'll ask you this, your kid has educational frustration and you're going to call a tutor, what background would you look for in that tutor? Maybe a teacher? Maybe an educational background, maybe a coaching background, maybe something like that. It makes sense. And then as you go along, we have all these stakeholder groups. Well, the model that we found in the United States, which we really try to employ here, which we've had tremendous difficulty for multiple reasons, has been you have to identify who is the best at each level. There's 2 parts to that. We need to identify what stage potential gang members are at in their life. What are the signs that we should be looking out for collectively among all the stakeholder groups and community members? And then who do we call? Who do we bring in to help support this? So with this, the model we wanted was it said you have to get together with everybody. You got to get together with Children's Aid, the school boards, Safe and Caring Schools, City of Toronto, Scott's here, different levels of government. We got RAM here, social workers, parole officers, corrections officers. You got to look at that life cycle of this gang member, how many agencies and groups this guy goes through, and how many signs we're seeing and how many things we're missing. Because by the time we get to community, you're now at 36 risk factors over 5 groups. We get asked at the beginning, the first 2 years of this, our higher up, our Deputy Chief Raymer, would call up our office every month and say, guys, what does the program look like? The program. And every month, as uncomfortable as it was, we had to say to the deputy, sir, there is no program. I said, what do you mean there's no program? And this is the best way I can explain it to you. 5 risk factor categories. We'll just stick with that. If I had 5 different colored balls in my hand, red, brown, black, blue, orange, doesn't matter. And I said to you, how many different combinations of 5 can we make? How much would you say? It's just problem solving 101, all right? We have 5 categories of different problems, so we got to look at how many different combinations. I'll tell you, 3,125. So when I get asked about a single program to solve that, there is no single program that can solve that many problems. Now we look at it on a greater scale, being the 36 risk factors. It's 150 unvigatillion, which is 150 with 69 zeros after it. I don't have if I had a program, I wouldn't be here. I would have wrote a book. I would have been on the Oprah Winfrey Network. I would have had an awesome YouTube channel. I wouldn't have been a cop. I would have sold this program to everybody. There's no single solution. You have to find as many solutions as possible drop them in all the different age categories. And part of us doing these town halls and to get into these neighborhoods was we're getting into our third year. January 9th will be our third year of piloting things, trying things out, talking to different people. We've spoken to so many people, and we've gained some tremendous insights. I gotta tell you, as we've spoken to City of Toronto, Scott McKean there, who's one of our partners in this. We have Ram from the provincial government, who really helps fund a lot of these initiatives in terms of the grants and some other stuff. We've talked to psychologists from all over Canada, social workers from all over Canada, tons of probation and parole officers, gang members themselves, gang families, victims of gang crimes, every police service, major police service in the world we've spoken to about what do you have here that works. And all across the world, there's no single program that fixes this problem. You got to drop in as many as you can. And the point of doing these town halls was a couple for us, but the biggest one is to find community leaders and community champions. The reason why is for us to get this thing off of the ground, we have to develop some high-level partnerships, which takes some time. But more important than that is we need to have the perspective from the inside out. We can't come into the communities and give you solutions to problems without asking you first, what is the problem for you here? All right, one of the best quotes we had from one of these town halls from a community member was, we're not underserviced, we're poorly serviced. The point of this is to find yourself, victims, impact players, leaders, and to say from the inside out, what do we need to do? How do we need to do it? Here's the framework. You got to get all these agencies, stakeholders on the same page. We got to understand whose role is what and where are we the best suited for it. And then we need to understand from the inside out, what's happening? Like, what do you need for it to happen? And for us as law enforcement, East End, I can tell you, in my experience, is very different than the West. It's not to say it's less worse or more worse, it's just different. The West has been an animal. It's been a rough spot over there. It's not that these town halls are negative, they're always positive, but your story is one we've heard many times over there. And that room is filled with not just parents who've lost their kids and found their kids murdered, but it's also filled with parents of kids who've committed murder and that have a tremendous amount of guilt and shame and that are looking for solutions themselves. And we have other community members that are just prisoners in their own environment that said we can't even go out and do stuff. So the idea is with us, we're not stupid. We're the police. We understand we're not trusted everywhere. Nobody calls police when they have extra birthday cake at home. Right? When do people call police? There's been a shooting. My house got broken into. I saw something. I heard gunshots. That's when people call police. So automatically, you're not calling us when there's fantastic things happening. There's a shooting star. Call the police. I hope they see the shooting star. It doesn't work that way. It's already built in. I'm good with that. I don't care. That's fine. But we can't bring that into neighborhoods and spend 90% of my time trying to develop trust. I don't have the time for that. We don't have time. It's too late. We got to look who already has the trust, who already has the influence in the community, and how can we build you up? How can we get what we want done without wasting our time trying to build trust and relationships? The reality is you're never going to trust Toronto Police. You might trust me. You might trust a single officer. You don't trust the police. That's fine. That's stupid. We can work with that. But we need to know who already has the established trust in there. Ensure that they understand the framework and understand that we have some open lines of communication to be able to address the issue. And the issue is finding out what the truth is, regardless of who you think you're going to offend. What's more important here? Is it saving a life, or is it worrying about looking like a good guy and walking away from here saying that I didn't offend anybody today? I don't care anymore. That's besides the point. We've done too many of these now to try to pamper this and make it seem like it isn't what it is. As we're talking here, there's kids being shot and killed on a daily basis. We're looking at the last 175 days, there's been 150 shootings. Something's got to give, something's got to change. We've got to put the responsibility there. That being said, because we have a pretty tight and small, close room, and it's a lot of police officers as well as some community members, generally what we end up doing is we end up having where it's 50 or 60 community members, we shut down the mic, we shut down the camera, and we have an open and honest conversation. And in there we learn tons of stuff. And the stuff we're learning isn't that, John sells drugs out of that house and Jim has a gun. Today isn't for that. That's for an individual connection for you. If you have an individual officer that you trust. The neighborhood officers here, right? You guys are all here. You're from the community. If you guys don't mind just putting your hands up. These are for you here these are your contacts. These are the officers that are going to be in your neighborhood for the next 4 years with the focus of building relationships and networks. You can talk to me for sure, but you're going to get a better bang for your buck talking to one of these officers because they're going to be around 24/7. They know your community way better than I'm ever going to know. I can't come in here and give you the best advice, but we work together. Right? We're all one and the same, and this is the same mission here. So they're going to be your go-to people for that. But I'll give you some insights of some of the stuff that we learned, the big three that have stuck with us the most in terms of promoting organizational change and getting our mission accomplished. And it came down from these type of conversations afterwards. And what I'll do is I'll give you the 3 examples. If you have anything you want to add, you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. And it'll stay confidential here, where we don't blast it out there, unless you've seen a murder. I can't help you there. Then we got to work on things. All right, if you've seen a murder, we got to stop. We got to have a different conversation. But if you want to talk about your experiences in other ways, by all means, we can talk about it. I'll give you the insights that we've gained. For the police officers, this has been probably one of the most valuable for us and for the community as well. What happens is, when it comes down to murder, probably the most heinous crime anybody could do is murder. Even if you ask police officers, it's such a big crime. Has anybody arrested anybody for murder? Have you put the handcuffs on somebody and said, you're arrested for murder? How many times, Jamie? Once. And you've been around a long time. Maybe twice. But how long have you been a copper now? Jamie, 29 years. Put the cuffs on a guy for murder once for sure, potentially maybe twice. Remember it very clearly? It's a big deal. Anybody else arrested somebody and put the cuffs on murder? How many times?
Once.
How was that?
I remember every detail.
Once, right? Anybody else? It's a big deal. It's a huge deal. When you, even as a police officer, professionally, you go to arrest these type of people. Jamie, who's been a police officer for 400 years, 29 years, he's put the cuffs on somebody once. Some of our other officers were all around 15 years, give or take a few. You know, I've never arrested somebody for murder, you know, but we hear of it and we're like, man, that is crazy. And with us, the number one issue you have when it comes down to murders for law enforcement and for courts across the world, the number one issue when it comes down to murders is finding witnesses who want to testify in court. Right, that's a huge issue for us. That's the number one issue, is finding a witness that feels comfortable, especially on a gang-related murder, to come out and say, I saw the murder, I know who did it. And it's for multiple reasons, right? They don't want to get hurt, they don't want any retaliation. But what happens is, as law enforcement, for us cops in the room, for the coppers in the room, how many of us have done a canvass for homicide? Right, a canvass for homicide is a murder happens, the big bosses come in, they grab all the police officers and they say, go knock on doors and see if anybody saw a murder. And for the community members, has your door ever been knocked on by a police officer saying, have you seen a murder? And that officer has been in uniform? How uncomfortable is that for you?
Scary.
It's very scary, right? And then, even if you did, how comfortable would you be? If you saw a murder outside of your door, just happened a couple hours ago, now you got a police officer knocking on your door, carrying some paperwork, and he says, can I talk to you? You've seen a murder. Are you going to say, I did see it, come on in, officer? Knowing that there's a crime scene, there's media there, all your neighbors are probably looking at it, and you're going to be the guy. It's a real thing. So what happens is, as police officers, this is the important part for us, is we knock on those doors and we victimize ourselves in the process. We say, we can't solve this murder because nobody's coming forward. That's what we say. So we had this conversation, and this came out of a town hall, and it came out organically. And in this one neighborhood that we were in, a 15-year-old kid was shot and killed earlier in the year. All right, and as they were shot and killed, we had a family member like yourself that was close to the family. She was very passionate about the experience, and she brought up a few highlighted points. And listen, she's valid in her points. And her points that she brought up, Scott, I don't know if you were there for that one, man. Yeah, and you'll remember the point that she made up. She said, listen, a couple things. First thing is, when that murder got announced on TV and the media went to the chief of police and they said, there's been a murder here, 15-year-old kid was shot and killed, and the chief said yes, the follow-up question from the media was this gang related? And the chief said yes. By all accounts, when I looked into it, on the law enforcement lens, it was gang related. This was a gang related homicide. Here's the problem that we didn't know was happening on the community side of it. That community didn't know that 15-year-old is a gang member. They knew him as a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 8-year-old who's playing in the lobby. They've known that kid from 0 to 15. Community housing residents in that particular area have been there for generations. So the kids that they see growing up, they were big. So when they were watching the news and they saw a 15-year-old that was shot and killed, and we said it was a gang murder, you got to look at that different perspectives. The one perspective is, the reason the media asks, is this a gang member potentially, is what does that do for everybody else? Let's say you're not a gang member. Let's say you don't live in a gang community. And there's been all these murders, and every murder it says gang member, gang member, gang member. What do we all do? Oh, it's not in my neighborhood. It's not my people. It's not going to happen to me. Well, to that community where it's actually from, they felt like we had devalued that death. They said, man, listen, regardless of what he was still a 15-year-old kid to us. So when you guys say this is a gang-related homicide and you don't add anything on top of it, and you don't re-highlight the fact that this is a 15-year-old kid, regardless of the circumstance, he's dead, he's gone. We've devalued that death, so when we knock on those doors, there's already a disconnect. The second part of that disconnect is, as police officers, oftentimes when we get into these neighborhoods and we knock on those doors, there's this false belief that 100% of the distrust from the communities is at us. That the entire distrust in their entire life is just based at the police. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. But we understand that now because we've been so heavily engaged in some of the most gang-impacted communities in the city of Toronto. And they're really easy to develop a positive relationship in there. It was not hard for us. It was just showing up and talking normally to them.